Welcome to the Grim Report, your gateway to the world of the strange and unexplained. I'm your host, Sydney Vale, and every week we dive deep into the eerie, the mysterious, and the downright chilling. Am I going insane? I know how this might sound, but I can't help but wondering if I'm just losing my mind. I've always had strange experiences, but lately things are getting worse. Maybe it's time to just admit that I might truly be going insane. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something to it. Growing up, my grandmother always said I could see demons. She believed in the paranormal, unlike my parents, who dismissed her stories. I grew up in a house that everyone claimed was haunted. As a kid, I would often talk about the old man in my bedroom, which spooked my family. But even after moving, those strange occurrences followed me. I've seen shadow figures, apparitions, sometimes even things that look like my family members, but weren't. I've been let outside in the middle of the night by what I thought were my parents, only to find myself locked out. In middle school, things took a stranger turn. I had what some might call an imaginary friend, but this was no ordinary companion. I first met her late at night at my cousin's house, a place known for its hauntings. My cousin, Kay, and I were sitting in the dark, talking about our paranormal experiences, when I suddenly saw her, clinging to the ceiling corner, staring right at me. She had long, red hair, eyes that were both red and white, and a black scorpion tail. She introduced herself as Kuru. From that moment, Kuru became a constant presence in my life. I felt protected of her, like a little sister, and she followed me wherever I went. Oddly enough, after she appeared, the hauntings at K House stopped, while they increased at mine. But Kuru kept me safe from the darker entities. For months we were inseparable, until one night when she acted strangely. We were at Kay's house for a sleepover when she says, "I'm going to hide," and then she disappeared. The last thing she told me was something was looking for her. I never saw her again. Years later, I learned about a disease called Kuru, linked to cannibalism, which sent chills down my spine. I have never heard of it before. How could I know her name? For a long time after that, the paranormal activity in my life calmed down. I stopped seeing apparitions, hearing whispers, but today, things changed. It started with a small white light in the middle of the room. Then the whistling began. It sounded like my own whistle echoing through the house. I tried to stay calm, but something about it felt wrong. So I walked away, trying to distract myself. But when I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, everything shifted. There were two overlapping reflections, one normal and the other not. In the second reflection, my hands had claws, long, inch-long claws that didn't belong to me. And my eyes, the area around them was empty, like the reflection had just erased that part of my face. I've never felt such dread. It was different from any encounter I'd ever had. Now as I write this, I keep hearing growling noise that no one else seems to hear. They're getting louder, like something is creeping closer. I don't know what's happening anymore. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm not even sure I believe myself. The final apology, the midnight visit. My grandfather was a bad man. Not in the casual sense of the word. He was truly a terrible person. An alcoholic, violent, and unpredictable. He once tried to kill my grandmother right in front of their kids. One of his lesser offense, if you can even call that, was abandoning her with 6 children all under the age of 12. Despite everything, a few of his kids kept minimal contact with him over the years. He lived about 30 or 40 miles from my grandmother and 2 of their children who stayed close by. In his 80s, my grandfather's health took a sharp decline, and he ended up in the hospital. It wasn't a surprise when he passed away in the middle of the night. The next morning, his oldest child, my aunt, was the one tasked with identifying his body in the morgue. On her way there, she decided to stop by my grandmother's house to break the news. When she walked in, before she could even say a word, my grandmother greeted her with something strange. "Oh, it's a sad day. He died just past midnight, I imagine." My grandmother had been showing some signs of dementia. Nothing too serious, but just enough to make her say odd things every now and then. My aunt brushed it off, assuming that one of her siblings had already called her to inform about their father's passing. Shaking off the odd comment, my aunt continued on the way to the morgue. When she got there, she saw the death certificate. She was stunned. The time of death was listed as 12:10 a.m. How could my grandmother have known? On her way back, still rattled, she stopped by my grandmother's house again. "Who called to tell you about Dad?" she asked. "And why did you say he died just past midnight?" Without missing a beat, my grandmother replied, "He came to see me at 12:30, and we talked for a while. He wanted to apologize for everything he did to me and you kids. I think he made his peace and was able to move on, so I'm glad for that." After that, my grandmother simply resumed humming to herself, working on a jigsaw puzzle, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Whispers in a Closet, a childhood haunting. When I was a kid, babysitting our neighbor's son, Alex, was just another part of our routine. My brother and I were used to having him over, especially since he loved playing with my extensive Lego set. It sat in the corner of the room, facing the window, and it could keep him occupied for hours while we played video games in the living room. One night, I dozed off on the couch while babysitting. My brother roused me from sleep, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alex is under your bed and shaking," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. I was still groggy and confused. "What's wrong with him?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. My brother urged me to follow him into the room and try to coax Alex out. As I entered the room, I was met with the sight of Alex trembling uncontrollably, tears glistening in his eyes. "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" I asked, crunching down to his level. He glanced nervously at my sliding closet door and whimpered. I instinctively moved closer, ready to pull him out, but before I could reach him, he bolted past me, racing out of the house and straight into his front steps, where he waited for his parents to return home. When our parents finally came back from dinner, Alex explained his experience in detail, sending chills down my spine. My brother and I joined them to hear what had happened. "He was playing with your Legos," Mom said, when he heard a strange murmur coming from your closet. Something that sounded like, "Come here." She paused, looking at me with wide eyes. He turned around and saw a light coming from the crack in the closet door. Then he saw an eyelid open. Alex's word echoes in my mind, sending a jolt of fear through me. "There was a man in your closet," he said, his voice trembling. That was the last straw for him, and he scrambled under the bed for safety. Our hearts raced as we rushed back into my room, the weight of dread heavy in the air. The moment we entered, horror washed over us. My closet door was ajar, swinging slightly as if someone had just left. The window, which had securely been closed earlier, was now wide open. Scattered across the floor were many of my belongings, knocked over, as if someone or something had been searching for something. We stood there, silent, grappling with the enormity of what just had transpired. My family's anxious glances exchanged unspoken fears. We had no explanation for what we just experienced. No rational way to comprehend the presence that had lingered in the shadows of my room that night. Thank God nothing worse had happened, but the eerie feeling of being watched would forever haunt me. Murder. A bit of background to start. When my wife was young, her family lived with one set of her grandparents. It was a close-knit arrangement, but it came with tragedy. Her father was murdered in that very house, upstairs in his bedroom. For over 20 years, that room became nothing more than a storage space, a sealed reminder of dark history. My wife's parents tried to sell the house a few times, but in a small town, word travels fast, and no one wanted to buy a place with such a heavy past. So they stayed. The murder was rarely spoken of. Years later, while my wife and I were engaged, her family had to go through the painful process of a murder trial. I attended in support, and during the proceedings I saw the crime scene photos. They were burned into my mind. Images of the room where her grandfather had been killed. Time passed and we started our own family. By the time our oldest was 6, he knew nothing of the murder. In fact, no one talked about it around the kids. It was a story buried deep within the family, too painful to bring up. My father-in-law, however, decided one holiday it was time to reclaim the room where the murder had taken place. He thought it would be a good idea to turn it into a hangout spot for the grandkids. He set up sleeping bags, a TV, and planned for the kids to sleep there during the upcoming family gathering. My wife and I weren't really thrilled about it, but we stayed quiet, knowing how sensitive the subject was. We were the first to arrive for the holiday, and soon after our son went upstairs, curious about the room. He spent a couple hours up there alone, which was unusual for him. He was always so full of energy and couldn't sit still for long. Eventually, we went to check on him, and what happened next still makes my skin crawl. I found him in the room, sitting rigidly in front of the TV, completely still. He wouldn't even look away from the screen when I entered. "Hey, buddy, is everything okay up here?" I asked. "Yeah," he said flatly, eyes glued to the screen. "All right, have fun." I started to turn away, but then he spoke again. "Daddy, do I have to sleep in here? I don't want to." That caught me off guard. "Why not?" I asked. He paused, still not breaking his gaze from the TV. "I'm not alone." Every hair on my body stood up. Trying to keep my voice steady, I said, "Well, yeah, I'm here with you, buddy." "No," he whispered. "There's someone in here with us." My heart started racing. "Are they nice? Mean? A grown-up? A kid?" I asked, hoping this was just some child's imagination running wild. "A grown-up." "What are they doing right now?" I asked, trying to play along. "They're watching you." My blood ran cold. "You never said anything like this before at your grandparents' house, and you've been here a lot," I said, trying to make sense of it. "They don't leave this room," my son said, his voice calm but unsettling. "And I've never been in here before." "Where are they now?" I asked, dreading the answer. Without looking away from the TV, my son lifted his hand and pointed to the far corner of the room. "They're standing over there. They don't move much." I didn't need to ask anything else. "Okay, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't have to stay in here." He left the room with me, without another word. We never spoke of it again, but I know what I saw in those crime scene photos, and I know exactly where he had pointed. Whispering shadows. I haven't shared this story with anyone since childhood, and for good reason. It terrified my cousin and earned me a rare beating with a belt from my dad. As an adult, I kept it to myself because I fear people might think I'm losing my mind. But the truth is, I had a ghost that visited me on command. It all started one summer night when I was in 2nd grade. I woke up in the dead of the night to find a woman floating through my window into my bedroom. Strangely, I felt no fear. Instead, I sat up and asked, "What are you doing here?" She replied, but for some reason I couldn't recall her words, her voice, or even her appearance the next morning. I only remember thinking, what a strange encounter. In true 8-year-old fashion, I continued, "Well, you better get going because my dad might wake up, and then he'll be mad." With that, she slipped out through my slightly ajar bedroom door, and I drifted back to sleep, unconcerned. At first, I thought it might have been sleep paralysis, but the following morning brought a rush of excitement. I had my very own fairy godmother, and I named her Crystal. I even mentally urged her, please come back. Wake me up at dawn so we can talk. To my astonishment, the next morning, just as light began to spill into my room, I heard the whisper, come here. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. This was real, and I froze, not daring to move a muscle. All I could do was pray silently. Go away, go away, go away. I could feel her presence right by my head, and even now, as I recall it, tears well up in my eyes. Okay, maybe I thought this was just a one-time occurrence, a coincidence. But no, every time I bravely called out to her before bed saying, okay, come this time. I swear I won't get scared. She would return, whispering my name, and every time I nearly wet myself in fear and keep my eyes tightly shut. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was all just a trick in my mind, my brain waking up to light and conjuring these hallucinations. But things took a turn. One summer, while camping with a friend, I decided to share this bizarre secret. She was skeptical, insisting I call for Crystal to come visit us that night. I agreed, half hoping she wouldn't show. But as dawn broke, I heard her voice calling both of our names. We stayed perfectly still, terrified, and to my utter disbelief, my friend confirmed later that she had heard it too. She panicked and sobbed to her parents later that day about my ghostly visitor. Naturally, I was blamed for scaring the kids, and I found myself in trouble yet again. Later that summer, I recounted my experience to my cousin. Before long, she was terrified and ran to her mother, which led to another belt punishment for me. I was furious at getting punished for something I didn't fully understand. Angry and upset, I shouted, I never want to see you again. And I didn't. Thank God, I chose to bury those memories, shoving them deep down, especially at night when I was alone. It's been years, and I try not to think about it anymore. But sometimes, in the quiet hours, I can't help but wonder if Crystal is still out there, lingering in the shadows, waiting for a moment of vulnerability to return. The voice that saved me, a cop's unexplained encounter with the impossible. I was still a rookie cop when I got the news. My older brother, the one I'd been closest to my whole life, had committed suicide. He lived in another state, and the distance only made the guilt sharper. How could I have not seen the signs? By the time they found him, his remains were in such bad shape that we had to have a closed casket service. I couldn't even say goodbye properly. About a week after his death, I went back to work, trying to push through the haze of the grief. One night, my partner and I spotted a pimp pistol whipping one of his girls. Without a second thought, I jumped out of the car, and as soon as the guy saw me, he took off running. Gun in hand, I chased him down a narrow alley, heart pounding. He cut through a corridor that led to a courtyard in the middle of the building. As I was about to hit the courtyard, I heard it, his voice, my brother's voice, clear as day as he was standing next to me. It's okay, he said. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind racing, but there was no time to process. As I stepped into the courtyard, I saw the pimp against the wall, pointing his gun right at my head. Before I could react, he squeezed the trigger. Twice. I froze, just for a second. My brain struggled to catch up with what had just happened, but my body moved on instinct. I rushed him and started beating him in the head with my revolver. I don't know why I didn't shoot him. Any cop would have been justified, but something held me back. After subduing him, I cuffed him and dragged him back to the street where my partner was waiting, wide-eyed. I told him about the guy pulling the trigger, but I kept the part about my brother's voice to myself. Even I wasn't sure what to make of it. We unloaded the pimp's gun right there, a small .32 revolver, and found 2 bullets with clear strike marks. He had pulled the trigger twice, just like I thought. I took the gun to the lab, and when I told the tech what happened, he was just as confused as I was. He put the 2 bullets with the strike marks back into the gun and fired them into the test tank. Both bullets fired perfectly. To this day, I don't know how I walked out of that courtyard alive. Maybe it was a fluke, or maybe it was something else, but I still hear my brother's voice as clear as day. It's okay.
Whispers in the dark corners of my mind. Shadow stands where light can't seem to find. I hear footsteps but nobody's there.